Welcome back to On the Light. In today's episode, I have a very engaging conversation with Joan White. Joan began her studies with BKS Iyengar in 1973. In this episode, you will hear Joan talk about Guruji's incredible power of observation, his continuum of practice over the years, how he loved to be a grandfather, and much, much more. Please enjoy this episode of On the Light. Well, thanks for meeting with me.
Oh, well, thank you.
So we're here to talk about Guruji. I've been told by many people you have a lot of wonderful stories about Guruji.
I don't know about a lot of wonderful stories, but I met him in 1973, so that put
Okay.
in
Yeah.
the old guard or somewhere, the oldies.
That's old. I mean, that's early. That's definitely early.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I met him. He used to call me his oldest student from America.
Oh, really?
He used to call me, he's my oldest student from America. And there were a couple of other people who did not like that. Let's put it that way.
So how did you start to study with him?
Well, I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay.
And so I started yoga in 1968, Mary Palmer and Priscilla Neal. Of course, at that time, we weren't doing Iyengar yoga. We were doing some eclectic mishmash of stuff that somebody brought back from India. But they were very serious. And Mary had Yehudi Menuhin staying at her house. I don't know if you know anything about Mary, but she had, actually it belongs to her son now, but she had a Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Okay.
Okay, and it was built on triangular modules. So she had the ultimate Utthita Trikonasana home. And she was the head of the musical society in Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor has a very powerful musical society, and she was the head of it. And so Yehudi Menuhin was coming to do a concert in Ann Arbor. And everybody would stay with her because not only did she have a triangular house, but she had a triangular guest house, which made it even better. You could live in a triangle. She really did. So Menuhin came and they were talking about yoga. And so Mary said, I do yoga and I have this program at the Y. And Menuhin said to her, well, what kind of yoga do you do? And she got out her little manual and showed him. And he said, no. He said, that's not, if you want to do yoga, there's only one person you can study with, and that's BKS Iyengar. That was in, 1970, I think. 70. Yeah, because then Mary's husband was a professor in the economics department at University of Michigan, and his specialty was South Asian economics. And Mary, who was a very powerful lady on her own, said to herself, if this is the man, Yehuda Menuhin thinks I should be studying with this man, I have to track this man down and I have to study with him. And just very fortunately, her husband got a 6-week appointment to go to Pune, to the University of Pune, to do a special economics course. So she said, great, I'm going to Pune. And she did. And she looked him up, and at that time he lived in this one-room house with a courtyard, and he was teaching people in the courtyard. And she presented herself and said, well, basically, here I am, and I want to study with you. And he said, basically, who wants you? I don't know if I want you to study with me. I don't know if I want to teach you. So he told her to sit on a bench in the courtyard and watch the class. And after she came every day for 3 weeks, sat on the bench. And after the 3 weeks, he looked at her and he said, okay, today you can join the class. But if you come down from headstand, before I say to come down, you're out and you'll never come back. You're out, never come back. she said to herself, first of all, when she was telling me the story, and she said, well, I thought to myself, the longest I've ever stayed in headstand is 3 minutes. And I think they stay a lot longer from what I've observed. So they went to headstand, and he said, go up in headstand. And she went up in headstand, and she said to herself, I don't care. I am not coming down. I will not come down until he says come down, because I really want to study with him. So that's what she did. And she stayed 15 minutes, and he stayed, never having stayed longer than 3 minutes. And he said, well, now you can come down. And so after that, she started studying with him. Then she went to study with him in England. And while she was there, I had a child, and I had a horseback riding accident. I know a lot of people have written, and everything I read about myself is just incredibly wrong. That's what I tell you. People have, I read 2 books which mention this incident, and they're so wrong. It would be good if they'd asked me, Anyway, I had this terrible horseback riding accident, and I called her, and my son was 3 months old. I said, Mary, I'm really in bad shape. I had this really bad accident, and they're telling me that I'm not going to be able to do anything because I've broken my back quite badly. And she said, honey, she had this really great Southern accent. Honey, there's nothing to worry about, because this will be the reason I'll get BKS Iyengar over here. She said, I've been looking for a reason to get him over here. This will be the reason. And that's what happened. So he came. There were 2 teachers, Mary Palmer and Priscilla Neal. And Priscilla was a fascinating person. And all of our husbands were professors at the University of Michigan. So my husband was a classical archaeologist. Priscilla Neal's husband was an anthropologist, and Mary's was an economist. So she invited us all to dinner, and I sat next to BKS. He was so incredibly personable, was so friendly and so nice. He was a great raconteur. He could tell wonderful stories, and he told us stories about the Queen of Belgium and, everything that people know now, but we, of course, didn't know anything. He had come to the States in 1957 for the Arm and Hammer people. I don't know if you know about that, but anyway, they invited him. He came. I think he kind of felt like they treated him in one way like a circus performer. Menuhin had told them to bring him. On the other hand, they said they wanted to take lessons from him. And you can see this in the Life magazine from 1957. The lady showed up in Bermuda shorts and pearls, and it was on the back, in their back garden. He just said, Americans are not ready for me after that experience. They're not ready for my yoga, and I'm never coming back. That's what he said to me. I'm never coming back. I'm never going to come back. Then Mary, being Mary, and me having this accident got him to come back. That's how he came to the States, was because I had the accident. She's very persuasive. He really liked her. He really liked her husband. He realized, that she was deadly serious, and she could do it. And so he came. And so then that night we had dinner, and I got to meet him, and I sat next to him, and we talked, and he entertained us, all of us, for the rest of the evening with stories. He also gave an incredible demonstration, but the demonstration came a bit later in the visit. The next day we had class. We started this week-long classes, and he saw me, and there were quite a number of people, and we were in a gymnasium at the University of Michigan, and he had us all in lines. He loved lines, and we had us all front lines, and then completely, everybody was set one behind the other, and we were exactly lined up. And he said, no, you have to be in the middle of the front line. I need to observe you to see what you're able to do. And then he started teaching, and I was like, who is this person? This person is 100% different than the person I sat next to last night. When he wasn't teaching, he was very, very different. When he walked in and he started teaching, he had total command. I very interested, and I ran a museum program. I was very interested in communication techniques, teaching techniques, how to get people. And I was dumbstruck. By the time he got his first sentence out, everybody was riveted. He held your focus like nobody I'd ever met. And his technique, he didn't have a lot of English at that point. His English wasn't great. He used a lot of technical terminology. I had no idea what he was talking about. Like everything was from the median plane. I did a lot of classical art and a lot of art. We never talked about the median plane. He would compare everything. You have to be in the median plane. This is close to the median plane. That I'm thinking like, what is it? So then all I did was observe. Because I have art training, so I can observe, right? So I would just observe, and whatever, it didn't make any difference in that point. I would observe, I would see what he was doing, I would see what people were doing. It took us about 15 minutes before he terrorized us all. My granddaughter just told me, she came down to Penn yesterday she took a couple of classes because she's looking at colleges, and she was horrified because she went to a class, nobody was paying any attention. They were all on their phones. And I thought to myself, not only could I never have done that at college, when I was in college and graduate school, but BKS Iyengar, if you ever weren't paying attention, he caught that every time. And he would, over the years, I took so many classes with him, he would be right on you. He never missed anything. He was amazing. And like I say, everyone was riveted. And then one time he had me doing something in Parshvottanasana. So me being me, I sort of did some little inventive thing, and he ran over and he stood right next to me and he said, "I want to try that."
Oh my gosh.
And he did. He said, "This is very good." And I was like, I thought he was just incredible. I thought, first of all, the humility that he showed. Here he was, and he was so commanding and so demanding and so focused. And his ability, even though his English wasn't good, he would know immediately if he said something and we couldn't follow it, he'd say it a different way. And he keeps saying it until we got it. That was one of his techniques, which he always had. And he just refined it and got better and better at it as his English improved. I think it was very frustrating for him in the early days when we didn't get it and we couldn't say, well, we don't really understand what you're talking about. He really didn't like it if you suggested that he wasn't expressing himself in the King's English. He really didn't like that. But we did get it. I mean, he would find a way, or he would show us. He always demonstrated stuff for us to see. That was fascinating. That was fascinating, but you learned. After a 2-hour class with him, you came out and you had a whole new understanding, which maybe you could do and maybe you couldn't do it, but at least you realized that there was a depth to what you were doing that was totally different to the ways in which it had been presented. I'm married. After she started studying with him, she decided that we should switch over from our program to his program. She said, you got to, like I have an original copy of Light on Yoga because we all had to get Light on Yoga. And when Menuhin said to her, you have to study with this man, do you have Light on Yoga? She said, oh yes, I have Light on Yoga, but that's much too hard. Much too difficult. We can't possibly use that. So of course we switched over to using it. Once she started learning standing poses, a lot of standing poses. We really stood and stood and stood and just worked on standing poses and inversions. And so she did. She switched the whole program over. So by the time he came, we at least knew the names of the poses and what to do. Yeah, it changed my whole life.
Yeah.
It changed the direction of my life. I was doing a lot of archaeological work and conservation, object conservation and stuff. I changed my whole focus to yoga, which wasn't exactly in 1973.
Maybe a little bit of a risk.
What do you mean you're not going to go get a PhD? What do you mean you're not going to change your mind and go to, if you're going to change your mind, go to law school? That was my family's interpretation of that. My husband was, continue, let's go on and you'll get a PhD in classical art history. My brother was yelling at me, you got to go to law school. We all go to law school. Everybody in my family's a lawyer. And I'm like thinking to myself, I don't want to do either one of those things. I did stay in archaeology, but I did really switch my focus to yoga. So in that sense, he changed my life. And also he taught me how to work, how to deal with my problems, which were pretty serious. I got it. Then I just stayed with him and said, I don't care about any other yogis. I don't care about any other form of yoga. This is it. Anybody that can teach the way he teaches, anybody that communicates even when they can't communicate with words, I want to learn from that person. I just really, and I know other people say the same thing. It was so revolutionary. Maybe today people wouldn't see it, but in 1973, it was definitely a revolution to learn like that and to learn something that was so airy-fairy. I mean, yoga, I'm, staring at a candle, and there's a lot of airy-fairy stuff in yoga. And here comes this person and says, no, none of that is yoga. This is a vast discipline that requires focus. It requires intelligence. It requires study. Otherwise, you're not doing anything that's going anywhere. I had a class where, before we got to Guruji, where at the end of the term, the teacher said, do whatever asanas you felt you really liked. Do whatever. The woman next to me lay down on the floor and did Shavasana. And she never got off the floor. I don't remember if it was Mary or Priscilla said, what's going on? And she said, well, you told me to do whatever asana I liked. This is the best one for me. Why should I get up? This is great. They didn't really know. I think, somebody would go to India and they'd go to some ashram and they'd take a sort of course, which was this was deadly serious. Let's put it that way.
So when he came and taught you there in Ann Arbor, about how many students were there?
I'd say, I think the first day there were like 45 or 46. Yeah, it was a lot. Most yoga classes were like 6 people.
Right.
It was a room full of people, and everybody was like, after that first class, and people then, they came from different places who had heard about him. So the next time he came, we had more people. This came in 73 and 74 and 76. So each time we'd have more people. It never bothered him how many people there were. Then he taught at the Ann Arbor Y. He was one person in the classroom and one person outside of the classroom. I mean, in terms of, he was still commanding when he was outside of the classroom. He still had those scary eyebrows. He was less threatening, let's put it that way. He was a tour de force. He was a tour de force. And he had a wonderful sense of humor. It wasn't a sophisticated sense of humor, he didn't have a dark humor. His eyes would twinkle and he would laugh. Thought it was really important. I have a signed picture where he he wrote on it that it's really important to have laughter in your life, basically. And he would bring that he was very entertaining when he wanted to be. And I'm sure you've heard that he was like he would flash out. So he could be really angry and just really burst out with something that was like an explosion of anger. And 2 seconds later, he was laughing. He'd get really mad at somebody for what they did. There were certain things he wouldn't tolerate. Not paying attention was high on the list of things he wouldn't tolerate. He said, if you give somebody a direction 3 times, and 3 times, maybe you have to change that direction 3 times. But if they don't get it after 3 times, leave them alone and don't go back to them. People wouldn't like to hear that, but he really did follow that. With some people, he would just lose patience. And with other people, he never lost patience. But everybody that I know of, and I know a great many people that studied with him because of all the times I studied with him, I don't know anybody that didn't come under that anger at some point. At the San Diego convention, there were 550 people in this big room, which was a long time ago, 1990. And I was like 3/4 of the way back, and I'm very short. So, but he was on the stage, and we were going into Parshvottanasana. And I didn't put my hands in Paschimottanasana till I jumped. I got into the pose. He yelled, Joan, is that the way to go into Parshvottanasana? I was like, how did you even see me? How could you see all those people? And I was like, I was a deer in the headlights. Needless to say, I jumped back fast, put my hands in Paschimottanasana and jumped out again. But that's how he was. With the people he knew, any one of us, he would spot us wherever we were. You wonder how somebody teaches in a room of 1,000 people, because at one point in London, he had 1,200 people in headstand. How did he do it? He would see the people that he knew. He would spot them remarkably fast. And those are the people that he would teach from. Or he'd teach from the people in the front 2 rows, which makes total sense. I mean, if you have 40 people in the front 2 rows, they're bound to make the same mistakes that everybody in the back 2 rows are making. So I learned a lot. I mean, there's so much to learn from him. I never met anybody like him. And I was married to someone who was very brilliant and had an encyclopedic mind. And still, Guruji he was something else. There's just nobody like him. I don't think I'll ever in my lifetime meet anybody like him. One of the things that was really, I'd say, kind of set him apart was how quickly he responded to things. When I first went there in 76, in those days in medical, he didn't want us to know what was wrong with the people. That happened because people came and they would go back home and start medical classes based on what they saw. That made him very angry. Mm-hmm. And so by 77, 78, he no longer wanted us to know what was going on in medical class. You could help, but you weren't supposed to ask why you were doing what you were doing. At that time, it was pretty much him. Gita was assisting. Sometimes Prashant was there, but he was commander-in-chief, and there was no question about that, who was commander-in-chief. He would look at somebody, I'm sure you've heard all these stories, how he would look at somebody and in an instant, he would know what was going on. And when I interviewed him one time, I said, but Guruji, I've watched you so many times, just instantly know what's wrong. The person hasn't said a word. And he goes, I don't know how I do it. He said, it just comes to me. He said, I have no idea. He said, it just comes to me. And I think one of the reasons he never wanted to teach medical stuff was because that's how he got it. He couldn't say, well, I saw this and I saw this. Once he did an event that was after, where a bunch of people were around and there were some doctors there, and this was in the States. Somebody said, well, can you tell us something about this man? Just from looking at him. And he was not, he was dressed in a suit and regular things. Guruji, it was like he unveiled this guy's medical history.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, everybody wanted to know how he did it, because he never saw the guy before. He didn't know anything about him. And he said, well, look at his shoes. Look at the way this is worn. Look at the way those creases are. Look at the way the creases are in his pants. Look at the back of his jacket. Look at the way it hangs. I mean, he was talking about like his kidney problems and his this problem and his that problem. And like we were all looking at his shoes, looking at the back of his jacket and thinking, okay, but he did. He could tell from looking at someone's shoes and the way the creases, not just the heels. I mean, the heels are obvious. If your heel is worn down on one side, okay, we could get to that point. We could get to that point where you could say, okay, this person probably has a hip problem based on the way the shoes are worn down. But I don't know if anybody got to the point where they could look at the front of the shoes and say from the front, because he could say from the front, not just from the back. And he could look at the front of somebody's shoes. He would see how if you look at leather shoes and people walk on them a lot, they crease. Yeah. They get creased, right? Well, he could read those creases. And he could tell you that this is significant because it does that. It was just amazing. It was like this miracle man. Then they had special medical classes for him in Ann Arbor. They brought all these people in because Mary knew a lot of people. She knew a ton of doctors. And we had one medical class where we were allowed to observe. This was in 1974, I think. And someone came in with a daughter do you remember the drug thalidomide? Did you ever know about that drug?
No.
Okay, so it was a drug that was used in the 50s to the early 60s. And it caused terrible birth defects before they took it off the market. So people would be born with no arms and a hand coming off their shoulder.
Oh.
It was horrible. And even today, people whose mothers took thalidomide, I have a friend whom I haven't seen in 40 years. But anyway, she had to go every year to have certain tests done because her mother had taken thalidomide. Anyway, this woman came in with a daughter who had just like these little stub of arms and little hands off her arms. And she had never felt her arms. The girl had never experienced her hands or her arms. She just knew they were there and they just hung there. So Guruji put this girl in shoulder stand. He took her little hands and he wrapped them around his feet, his ankles, not his feet, his ankles. He had the mother help him. He was holding her up. Then he had the mother, then she was holding, and Guruji wrapped those little thalidomide hands around his ankles. And he pulled back with his legs and she felt her arms.
Wow.
She never, ever felt her arms or her hands. And it was so moving. I mean, she was maybe 20, 21, 22, somewhere in there. She had never had any sensation. He gave her sensation. She had it. I mean, it didn't just go away. What he did with his ankles, I don't know how he moved. You could see from the outside that he moved her shoulders and that he was gripping those little hands. He just did things with his knees and his shins, and he pulled, and she had feeling. And there were quite a number of doctors there. Everybody was just dumbstruck. But not everything worked. He was a human. He was a person. Sometimes in medical class, he'd do something that didn't work. And people go, why did he do that? It didn't work. He wasn't a miracle man. They brought somebody in with really, really, really bad scoliosis.
Mm-hmm.
He goes and he said to her, Madam, I am not a magician. He said, you need an operation. When you've had your operation, you come to me and I'll help you. But I can't do anything right now. And that drew me to him. He knew what he could do, what he wanted to try to do, and what he really couldn't do. And he didn't tell people. There are plenty of yoga teachers I have run into over these many years who have said, don't go to Western medicine. We just stick with yoga, just stick with this or that. He wasn't like that. He was not rigid. And that was something that I got early on, and many of my compatriots never understood. He was never rigid. And people who have turned this system on some ways into a very rigid system really don't understand what the Iyengars are about. He treated everybody differently. Not that we can, because we don't have that God's gift, which he said, I get it. I just got it. It's a gift. He saw everybody. He didn't see a block of people. He saw an individual. He had this incredible memory. Even when he was really old, he's in his 90s, he still had an extraordinary memory for people, for problems. He had a mind that was like a computer. So if he saw a problem, okay, he observed everything that he could about that problem, how it affected the person, how the person was built. Then if he saw a similar problem, he would compare it. He could do all this in his head. He would compare it to the first one, then the third one, then the fifth one, then the 50th one. And after a certain amount of time, he said he had a pretty good idea, if you were built a certain way, that these were the problems that you might incur. So part of his genius, like, he had this mind like a computer when it came to bodies. You can't imagine the bodies that he remembered. So he made those comparisons, and unfortunately, if somebody could have recorded, there was some way to have recorded all those things he had in his head, it would have been amazing. It would have been encyclopedic. I think part of his ability in the therapeutics classes was this encyclopedic knowledge in his head that he very quickly figured out. Okay, this person is fat, this person is thin, but they both have this problem. Why does one person have it? And that's the same thing like when he was teaching. If you came and asked him, like in a standing pose. So he'd be in the library. I'm sure he went to the library every afternoon. And people come down to the library and sit there and wait for him to drop some gem, which he invariably did. Very often he would say to someone like, Patricia, stand up, drop into Urdhva Dhanurasana. Just get up and drop into Urdhva. He did that. He used to do that to her a lot, drop into Urdhva Dhanurasana. One time I was having this problem in Parshva Konasana. So he said, get up and do Parshva Konasana. Didn't make a difference what you were wearing, nothing. Get up and do Parshva Konasana. And do it on the right. Now do it on the left. Now, what's the difference in the experience between the right side and the left side? Which is the better side? You have to compare. You can do this on the right, but you can't do it on the left. Why not? He said you should have the same experience on each side. And if you're not having the same experience, why not? And I think he did that all the time on himself. We would go, okay, I can't bend my knee to a right angle. Let's say I can do it on the right, I can't do it on the left. And we would see that big, I can't do it. After a while, he probably started with the big, I can't do it. But then as he penetrated inward and he could do it, but it wasn't still the same, he began to understand on a very deep level, whether it was a physical thing, a physiological thing, a psychological thing, he began to penetrate into the depth of why he couldn't get the same thing. What was it? What part of the sheaths did he need to penetrate to find the answers? And as he did that, of course, if you think of the way you go through from the outermost to the innermost, he moved from the outermost, the physical, physiological, skeletal, mental, and he just moved through all those things until he got to the point where he was in a state, in a meditative state, and finally in a state of samadhi. I saw him once in a background intensive. He did this upward facing bow, and you can see the pictures of with the green short pictures. He's gone beyond. He's in a moment or a state of bliss. And I was standing there along with the other people and watching that, and I was blown away. I looked at him and I thought, he's somewhere. He's in there, but he is in a place that's amazing. There's no strain. For me to reach back and grab my feet and try to stretch them up and blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm in agony trying to do something like that. He is, and he's there. He is the asana. For me, in that picture, he is Iyengar yoga. He's yoga. He would say it's not Iyengar yoga, it's yoga. Reach the state. He's free. It's interesting because when he started out in the early days, he was like us. I mean, he was not like us because he was like 25,000 times more flexible than we were, but he was struggling. He wasn't, free like that. He had plenty of struggles, and sometimes he included us in those struggles. Sometimes he didn't. And we were included. Believe me, we really struggled, because if he was struggling, we were struggling. But he wasn't in that state. He started out, he worked really hard, and he went through a lot of trauma, and he stuck to it. Seeing him do that was, in a way, it was a life-altering moment that somebody could be in that state. Okay, he was in that really difficult position, but somebody else could be in a meditative state in some different position. But when you see the freedom that he has, he made that tape, The Ultimate Freedom, in 76 in Ann Arbor, and he talks about it. That, for me, was the ultimate freedom. And as he got older, one of the things, so he was 59, I think, when I first met him, 58. And to see him at 95, I watched the whole continuum of, he peaked at 75. Believe me, not too many people peak at 75. It made a lot of us think, so it's possible to do a lot of stuff. I'm going to be like Guruji. Well, unfortunately, I wasn't like Guruji, but some others are. Gita wasn't. So he peaks at 75. And then he's going down the road like everybody else is. He's aging. And once you go beyond your peak, you can't do everything you did. When I was in high school, I could do all of this stuff, right? Well, when I was 75, I could do 108 dropbacks without thinking about it, and I could do 108 chakrasanas. But after that, now it's 70, now it's 106, 105. He kept going. So we watched him. We watched him go through I watched him from 1973 until he passed away in 2014. And I saw how he, unlike many, he didn't hang on to things. That was a lesson I learned very early on from him. He believed in moving on. If it wasn't coming, move on. It might come the next day. Don't just hang in there and over and over and over until you drive yourself crazy. And when it's not coming, if it's really not coming, like he said, those things are over. Somebody said, are you still doing something? And he goes, those days are over. I'm sure he didn't like it, that those days were over. Did he accept it? Yes. Did he keep saying, I don't think, and I talked to Prashant about this, he did not dwell on the stuff from the past. It would be nice if I could really be like him, not be stuck, but he didn't. He didn't keep saying, now I can't do what I could do last year or 20 years ago or 50 years ago. He didn't do that. And that was a remarkable lesson, that you are going to get to a point, nobody's body, even his, could be perfect. Get to a point in your life when you will not be able to do X, Y, and Z. And you have a choice. You know, you have a choice. You can be miserable or you can accept it and go on. And he accepted it and he went on. He did, you know, he would hold poses for a really long time. He'd be hanging over, he would over the back window, okay? So he's there for 45 minutes and he's watching Abhijata. He sees something he doesn't like that she's doing. So he reaches out from the back window, he grabs her ankle, and he's holding her. He's so strong. He could hold her, she could drop back. And then he just goes, does that, gives her his opinion, his direction, his correction. And then he goes back to hanging out on the back window. And then he'd do things like he'd hang over a stool. So most human beings would do that, and they might last in that position if they got into that position, maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds. He'd be there for 15 minutes. That's how he aged. He elongated the time in the asanas that he could do and took them to a different level.
Yeah, a deeper level.
Deeper level.
Which is beyond just being able to, you know, do 108 chakrasanas.
It was way beyond. And it showed you that the athleticism that people see is not the yoga. It's just the athleticism. And one of the interesting things moving between Guruji, Gitaji, and Prashant, you know, Guruji liked the people that could do. And then he'd push you like crazy. Gita tended to more to the people who couldn't do and helping them to do. He wasn't just interested in I'm not saying he was only interested, but you know, you could see that there was a big difference. She would take the time, and someone said they couldn't do Padmasana. So for an hour, we would work on different ways to do Padmasana. At the end of the hour, we might have no knees left, but that person was in Padmasana. That person might have been the least, seeming to be the least capable person in the class, but at the end of the class, that person was in that asana. And she was wonderful that way. She was great at sequencing. So was he, but they were different. They were different in their approach. Then you move to Prashant. And Prashant, of course, suffered this terrible accident in 87. And he had to really, he was an extraordinary practitioner. Don't think he wasn't. He was. But when he had his accident, that ended. And he had to accept that or not, which he did, and take himself in another direction. Over these, since 87, it's a long time now, he has gone and explored not being able to have all that physicality. What do you do when you can't do is basically And he says to people, you won't always be able to do these things. Just because my father is peaked at 75 doesn't mean you will. But what do you do? What happens when you can't do things? Is that the end of yoga? And a lot of people think it is. They don't tell you that, but they stop. He didn't stop. He explored, and he did all those strange things of hanging upside down for 45 minutes with his eyes bandaged or an hour. And now he can do 4 hours of pranayama, which nobody else can do, and stand up. But the point is that for me, he's really important because he shows that that's only one aspect of the yoga. Once Guruji yelled at me, he had me standing up, and I forget what we were doing, but I was standing next to somebody who was comparing us. And then suddenly, and I thought, I bet I could use my breath. I just thought, I was standing there listening to him, and I thought, if I use my breath a certain way, I bet I could get this action. So I did. And he looked at me, he said, I know what you did. And I was like, what did I do? And he said, you used your breath. And I didn't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. It's being compared to this other person, but I did use my breath. And a long time ago, I discovered things about the breath. Then when I started having the opportunity to go to Prashant's classes, because we didn't always have that opportunity. If you were there for an intensive, there was no going to Prashant's classes or whatever. But then when they stopped that, and I really wanted to study with Prashant because I had seen him doing all these things in his classes, and I thought I would really benefit from that. Still doing crazy asana classes. He gave super hard asana classes. That's what people go to him now. They don't realize, oh yeah, he used to, and his Pune students, he would really put them through the works. And every once in a while, I go every year, and every once in a while in those classes, he will give one of those classes. So often, I think he must have a sense that students are thinking, Prashant, as Prashant said, all the old people come to me. What happened to the old people? They go to my classes because I don't make them do stuff. Then he will give one of those classes, those killer classes. And it's like, where did that come from? Just killer. He can do killer backbend classes. But he has said, and I agree with him, that there's a certain point where you graduate, you get out of high school and you go to college, where your education goes to a different level. And that's what he's done. I think it's fabulous. I spent at least 1 month with him every year, so that does help. We have been friends since 1976. Anyway, the progression is really interesting. And we have Abhijata doing what she does, and she's also developing her direction. It's closer to Gita's and Guruji's, the way that she teaches, but it's a direction. I think that's really important. They are continuing to evolve, because one thing about this system is it continued. He never did the same class twice. Guruji's point was every day is different. He'd end every class with, let today's maximum be tomorrow's minimum.
He would say that at the end of class?
At the end of class.
Wow.
That was the end of class. Let today's maximum be tomorrow's minimum. I used to think about it a lot. One year he had me up and he gave me like a lot of criticisms about my Trikonasana. Of course, I went back and I worked on my Trikonasana, and I took those criticisms to heart. And the first thing he did, he would always do this to me. And the first day he would call me up on the platform, do Trikonasana. And he looked at me and he said, a whole year has gone by and you haven't changed. And I thought, what do you mean? I spent the whole year working on what you told me to do. And now you're telling me that I didn't change. He said, you have to go beyond. That's what I saw then. He didn't expect me to spend the whole year stuck. And I was stuck because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I didn't understand that I was supposed to take those things, build on them, come back and show him that had a deeper and more intense understanding of the asana, but I didn't get it. Then I got it. Then I got it, but it took me a little while to get it. I think tons of people had the same experience. Because you think, well, okay, then I have to work on that. He's telling me I need to work on that. My shin is doing this, and my this is doing that. No, because you stagnate. He never stagnated. So many people would go to India and then they'd come back and say, this is what they're doing in Pune now. So we're jumping our legs 25 feet apart, and we all have to jump our legs 25 feet apart. Never mind that people got injured because it was too wide. It pulled their Achilles. He had an idea. It worked for what he wanted, but for some people, it was too wide. So the teachers would go back. This is what's going on in Pune. This is how we do it now. Blah, blah, blah. He would never do that. He did it. He widened the feet so that it was better for your lower back, for lower back injuries. But to the point where, as Gita said one day, you get too wide, it does nothing except injure you, which is true. And you're supposed to use your intelligence and say, okay, I tried this. It's too wide for me. So let me shorten it up a little bit. Let me see what I can get out of it and how I can make it work for me. And that was not the message that a lot of people took back. And that was really too bad. It always used to pain me that people would think that he was rigid. He was never rigid. And everything he taught, he taught off somebody, and then we would all try it. Although we were not allowed to use the word try. He did not like that. Do it or you don't do it. You don't try it. But basically, he was trying it. And we were trying it. Okay, so X had this problem. He would put X on the stage. He would show how to work with X for that problem. Then we would all do it. We would do that work. Were we supposed to run home and teach it? No, we were supposed to absorb it and practice it and find out what worked, what didn't work, understand it. And that was a big problem, I think, for him. I really think that was a big problem, that so many people went back and made as if this was a rigid pronouncement. And that wasn't his way. For the most part, you were lucky if he touched you. You were really lucky. He didn't touch everybody. In the very early years, like in 76, he corrected everybody in every class in every asana. Everybody. I don't know how he did it. We started out, I think there was 35 or 40 they took. One point I was there were 163 people in that place that was supposed to be for 35 people. But he would go through the lines and he would pick everybody up and shoulder stand. He'd lift them, physically lift them up. You know how much strength it takes to do that? I mean, if I lift 2 people, I'm doing well. He would go right down the lines, lifting everybody, or he'd tell Prashant to lift a few and Gita to lift a few. Everybody. I don't know how he did it. The amount of energy he put into those classes was remarkable until he peaked at 75. He was so strong. He would he picked up this guy who was like 250 or 300 pounds. He just picked him up, put him on the ropes doing something. Basically, I love the Iyengars and I love the system, and I have hugely benefited from the yoga and from them, all of them. Every single one that I know, from Guruji to Abhijata. Everybody has a lot to offer. Everybody's very intelligent. Everybody has their piece of the pie. And if you're lucky enough to learn from one of them, I've been very lucky because I get to learn from all of them. I feel so blessed in my life to have had the opportunity to study with them. I can't tell you. They're like a second family to me. I got really sick in Pune last year, and Abhijata was wonderful to me. And Prashant was wonderful. I mean, they got in touch with me. They called me. They arranged for me to go to the doctor. they took care of me. And when my husband died in an accident, and Gita was teaching in 2018, and she had 1,400 people coming, she called me. And I said, Gita, I don't think I can come because I can't ask you. She said, I'll help you. And I said, but you have all these people, and we're out in Balawadi at that huge stadium. And she said, I don't care. She said, you come and I will see that you get help. And they met me when I got to Pune, and because I was pretty much in shock. Married for over 50 years, so it was a pretty big shock. They called me, they heard about it, they called me, they wanted to know what happened. And you can't imagine how wonderful they were. And the last night I spoke to Gita for over an hour, and she died within a few hours. And that was like 3 weeks apart. I lost Donald and I lost Gita. And it was hard. But I had a wonderful conversation with her. And she didn't, there were other people waiting. She made them wait. And neither one of them was supposed to die before me. That's what really pissed me off.
Oh,
Supposed to die. She was younger. She was a year younger than me. I used to say, they're a year younger than I am. They're people.
yeah.
Everybody has to understand that they're people. They can make mistakes. They can say the wrong thing. I listen to some of the people that are, very negative about Guruji, that say things like kick, what are they called? BKS stands for. And I just can't, I don't relate to that. Because I say to myself, I'll tell you, when I hear that kind of crap, you didn't like it? Why did you keep coming back? You want to badmouth him? Don't use his name. You want to sit and say whatever you want to sit and say? You got a lot out of it. Every one of those people I know, I mean, I can't say I know everybody, but I know some of the big naysayers pretty well. And I know what they got. And I know what they did. And I know how they parlayed his name into making a lot of money. And he saw that. He wasn't blind to it. And for them to say the kinds of things they say is so obnoxious, and it's so wrong, because every one of them took a piece of his pie. They all took something, and they all use it. Fine, you want to leave, you leave. But you leave, and you don't have to badmouth someone, and you just say, this is not for me anymore. Anyway, we are very lucky. We have Prashant, and we have Abhijata, and we have
Shrinit.
I still can't. When I see Shrinit, I see him as this little boy. I mean, I knew these people when they were born. I know what he looked like as a baby. We used to have these days. They would sort of have this talent day, and we listened to some wonderful talent. Shrinit's very musical. Most of the Iyengars are very musical. I don't know how much you know about that, but they're very musical. Prashant, of course, played the violin. Shrinit, quite a good drummer. I've forgotten what they call those kind of drums that he played. But, he's a little boy, and they'd call him up, and he'd be there with all of these adult yoga students. And instead of saying, okay, this is my grandson, he does a 5-minute or a 10-minute performance, it would be 45 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour. It's like, okay, my kid plays the violin and he's very talented, but I would never do this to him. And poor Trini would be sitting there, and they'd keep going on and on and on. So I still see him every time I took some of his classes, and every time I looked at him, I saw him sitting in his little white outfit with his drum, with all of us sitting around him. And I thought to myself, I can't take his classes because I can't get this vision out of my head of when he was little. And it's so funny.
And then very smart. He's so smart.
Oh, there were so many things. Guruji would bring up his, he didn't do that to Abhijata. Abhijat is a brilliant student. He didn't do it to her. He didn't make her perform, but he did do it to Shrinit. And one time I think it was Shrinit, he brought him up and he told him to just out of the blue, I think he was studying, he was in school, maybe 10th grade or something. And he yells out, "Hey, Shrinit, come up here." And he goes up and he says to Shrinit, "Now, watch him drop back. Just out of the blue, watch him drop back. You see, he's a natural. He drops back. He doesn't think about it like all of you. He's not doing that. He just does it." And I thought, oh my God, this is tough to be a grandchild of the Gurujis. We saw a fair number of the boys. We didn't see the girls. Anyway, his first grandson, we used to see him. He was really cute when he was little. Guruji was so good with his grandchildren. I mean, he just loved little children. He loved little children. He would light up. He just loved he liked being a grandpa. But then all the kids sent their teenagers to him. And then Gita became this big mother figure for all the teenagers. It was really hard on her. To everything else she had to do, then she had to worry about teenage angst. That's not fun, but she did it. And they made sure that all of them studied and all of them got really good grades. And it's good to see.
How about this? What advice would you give students and teachers in our method?
Okay, start looking at videos. Everybody that wants to do this method must look at the videos that are available, whatever is available of Guruji and whatever is available of Gita. And there's quite a lot now available. There's nothing except that one, the video from 1978 where he's sitting on the roof. He wouldn't allow videos. We weren't allowed any kind of mechanical, technical device when he was teaching. But there are some, I think there's one there's a couple of things I think from London. But anyway, if you want to teach this method, you have to learn this method. And the only way you're really going to get it is to hear them teach. I think all the teacher training and everything is fine. We didn't have that. Nothing was handed to us. We had to learn it, take a lot of classes and be there. That's how we learned, observing. And I really think that people have to look at these videos because none of us are them. We're not them. And if you want to understand, look at how they taught. I'm not saying you're going to be able to teach the way they taught, but try to understand what he was going for. What was Gita going for? How did they deal with people in their classes? You'll learn a lot. You can really learn a lot from watching videos. You can't really understand this method if you don't hear them teach it. So yes, you can absorb a lot of points. I've heard people in assessments, I don't even know how they memorize that many points. But that's memorizing a lot of points. That's not having the point come to you because you're observing something. So I want somebody to take a look and watch how Guruji comes up with something. Why does he teach this in this class? And why does he not teach it in the next class? Because that's what he saw in one class. See how spontaneous they are. They're spontaneous. They always teach. We tell students in teacher training, teach to the people in front of you. Do they do that? No. Maybe in their own classes, but when they're under observation, they do not very often. Where they're too nervous to see what's in front of them. But even in their own classes, they become very boring. I run through a huge gamut of emotional reactions in a Guruji class or in a Gita Ji class. I was never bored. I never thought, oh my God, if I hear one more point, I'm just going to throw up. I have felt that way listening to some people teach. Don't give me 50 points that have nothing to do with what I'm doing. So if you really want to learn this, to keep this method going, people have to go back to the source. Now we can do that because we have at least a number of videos, tons of stuff online. And it's not enough to just go to 5 classes a week the way some people do. It's not enough. Somebody's talking at you. When do you get to find out what it feels like if you have to come up with it?
That's very different.
It's very different.
Well, Joan, this has been really great.
Good. It's been fun.
Yeah, really fun. And hopefully we can do it again.
We can have more fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to On the Light. Today, I would like to close with an excerpt from Gitaji's book, Mobility and Stability, starting on page 12. She says, Patanjali opens the first chapter, Samadhi Pada, with the sutra, Atta Yoga Anushasanam. In that very word, Anushasanam, he is asking us to have complete stability since it is a discipline. The word anu, when prefixed to the noun, shasanam, means each by each. It means done repeatedly but methodically. In other words, it indicates the flow of discipline. Patanjali's first advice is, discipline thyself. Any discipline has a stable background. Discipline is definite, whereas indiscipline is indefinite. The discipline is not merely rigidity, like a rigid rule. It flows with regularities. In this sense, the discipline has a stable flow. Discipline and instability cannot go together, and obviously, when Patanjali says Anushasanam, he informs us the need for discipline, which denotes stability. This discipline is followed by stabilizing the mind. He indicates it with the phrase Chitta Vritti Nirodha. This means that the chitta, or the consciousness, is completely infilled and saturated with vritti, and in turn, these vrittis bring a kind of instability or wavering in that consciousness. These vrittis are vibrating all the time. And because of these vrittis, which bring instability, yoga comes into the picture and gives us tools of restraint. The mobility of vrittis is awakening the want of stability, which is nothing but restraint or nirodha. If the consciousness is always stable, with the absence of vrittis, the question of restraint or of practicing yoga would not arise. However, the chitta would have been like a still child, whereas it is lively. This factual awareness of the wavering of consciousness indicated by Patanjali is itself the journey from mobility to stability. From that movement of modification of consciousness, we have to remodify it in such a way so as to bring it to a state of stability. Obviously, it is indicative of a process of involvement, of remodifying it in order to go towards the restraint. Thank you for listening. That is all for today. Namaskar.